Please be seated.
L'audience est reprise.
The court is back in session.
U nastavku ću se pozabaviti.
As we go on, I will be dealing with some very concrete remarks with regard to the prosecution theses which have not been argumented and are insupportable. In a completely unreasonable way, the prosecutor has tried to say that the defense of Western Serbs and helping that defense is a criminal act, is a criminal enterprise. Did the Serbs need defending in the territory of the Croatian Federal Unit? Already in 1990, Tudjman changed the constitution against their will, and thus deprived them of their elementary right, the right to being a constituent people. What could happen next? Maybe what Judge Moloto said in the Martić trial. Why, you Serbs, when you saw that the Croats didn't like you there, why didn't you just up sticks and leave Croatia? This is more or less what he said. It's easy for Judge Moloto to talk. Where he comes from, whatever a man has, he loads onto a donkey or a mule and they can go wherever they want. In the territory of the former federal unit of Croatia, the Serbs had resided for over 400 years. They did not settle by having expelled Croats from there. It was the Viennese court, the Austrian authorities, that they wanted to settle them in the territories that had been ravaged by the Turks before they arrived. And from there, Croats had scattered all over Europe, and that's why they still live in Slovakia. The current Slovak president, Ivan Gašparović, is a Croat by origin. They also reside in a large group just outside Vienna. They're called Gradišćanski Croats, and they also reside in Hungary. There are lots of Croatian names used by the Hungarians who don't speak a word of Croatian. In Italy, until recently, there were a lot of villages that were settled exclusively by Croats who had fled before the Turks.
And now the Serbs had been invited to settle there in order to defend the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They protected the rest of the Croats and they defended the entire Europe from the Turkish invasion. When Turks became danger, the Austrian monarchy, after the Battle of Sadova and the defeat there, when Austria lost the possibility of leading the unification of Germany and had to let this job be done by Prussia, they also lost the opportunity for a dual division of the monarchy. What follows was a bargain with the Croats in that Croatia was given the whole of Slavonia. The Croatian parliament as an institution was for centuries the parliament of Dalmatia, Slavonia and Croatia. Dalmatia and Croatia and Slavonia were strictly divided. Dalmatians were not Croats. They are of the Roman origin. They are very close to Italians. They are not of Slavic origin. With the will of the Roman Pope and with his support, when Italy lost its dominance in the northern part of the Adriatic Sea, they were annexed to Croatia as a separate province during the reign of the King Tomislav. Slavonia was also annexed to it subsequently. However, this did not change the ethnic composition of Slavonia. Slavonians remained the same, just as Slovenes did. Slavonia and Slovenia is one and the same thing. Now, the Serbs came and settled in totally devastated territories in order to defend Austria. The so-called military border, or the military Krajina, was created as an autonomous region under direct governance of Vienna. In 1871, when the danger was over, an agreement was reached with the Serbian people to abolish the military border and to have the military Krajina attached to Croatia and Slavonia, because they were divided between Vienna and Hungary. So the Krajina was to be attached to Slavonia, but with the proviso that the Serbs remain a constituent nation equal to the Croats. And this was confirmed by the communists when they established the Croatian federal unit towards the end of World War II. This proclaimed Serbian right could not be effectively disputed, although there were efforts in that respect. And then when Tudjman came in power, by a stroke of pen, it was eradicated. So what other option did the Serbs have other than to resist this? And their memories of what happened during World War II were still fresh. In the Second World War, the Serbs were subjected to genocide by various fascist forces, by Germany and by the Croatian Quisling state. Serbs found themselves in a situation to be rescued by the fascist Italy from the Croats in 1941, which means that the Italians had to reoccupy their entire zone in order to prevent the Croatian crimes. Last night I was watching a program on television where it says that Draža Mihailović was a pro-fascist and that he cooperated with Italians. Yes, that's true, but the Italians did not commit genocide against the Serbs. It was done by the fascist Croatia and the fascist Germans, and the Italians never committed genocide against the Serbs, the Jews, and the rest. So you always have to choose between the lesser of two evils. Yes, Italy reoccupied those territories, but they were not a genocidal power, whereas Croatian state was genocidal power. And now you accuse me for telling this to the Serbs. I simply recounted facts. Hundreds and hundreds of books have been written about this. Numerous documents have been preserved from that period. And now, are we to pretend that this never happened? As soon as Tudjman got into power, our memories of the independent state of Croatia were revived. And in addition to that, he reinstated his connections with the Ustashi emigres. And were we then expected not to help the Serbs who were endangered? The snatching the Serbs' constitutional right, the snatching of their constitutional right was something that was done to the Serbs. And we had the same situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Serbs were denied their right to be a constituent nation. Towards the end of the Second World War, there was a dilemma whether to attach Bosnia and Herzegovina to Serbia or to establish it as a separate unit, and then the latter was accepted. It was proclaimed as a federal unit made up of equal constituent nations, i.e. Serbs, Muslims and Croats. Although at the time the Muslims were not designated as a nation, because at the time they had an option to decide whether they would declare themselves as either Croats or Serbs, but they had their specific features, being a separate religious community. All Muslims of Bosnia and Herzegovina descend from Serbs, who during the Turkish occupation converted to Islam. Initially, the majority of people accepted Islam for their own interests in order to achieve a privileged position, and then their children and their grandchildren, at least those belonging to the ruling class, were sent away to Istanbul, Egypt and Baghdad to study there. They studied Turkish, Arabic and Persian languages. They were able to read the Muslim holy scripts, and many of them became fond of Islam through their reason and through their approach to its values. Initially, nobody understood it, but part of the people accepted it in order to keep their lands, their estates, and to achieve a privileged position. After having studied these languages, people started appreciating this religion and started loving it. Even ordinary people were able to learn something about this new religion, although they could not read original scripts in Arabic or Turkish. But they listened to the sermons of priests. Now, these Serbs who converted to Islam became soldiers of the Turkish Empire. They took part in all the subsequent Turkish conquests. They fought around Vienna, in Asia, in Africa, God knows where. And they earned a reputation of good fighters. In turn, that gave them economic power and influence, but they were always a vast minority if compared to the Orthodox Serbs, and particularly if compared to the Catholics. Up until the great defeat in Vienna in 1690. At that time, the Turks were forced to abandon Hungary, Slavonia, Lika, and where do they go? They went to what is nowadays Serbia, all the way south to Macedonia, and they went to Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Austrian military leader, Eugene Savoy, raided Bosnia and Herzegovina and burned everything. He burned all the mosques in Sarajevo. He pulled down all the fortifications. And then, when General Piccolomini, the main commander of the Austrian army had to withdraw, and Eugene Savoy did the same. And what happened? The entire Catholic population was then moved by him to Slavonia, which left Bosnia and Herzegovina with fewer than 10,000 Catholics. A lot of Orthodox Serbs went along with them and settled in Slavonia. And that is how Slavonia, that had been a Turkish province for centuries, once it was vacated, Bosnian Catholics and Orthodox people came and settled there. A similar thing happened in Croatia. The Croats have their original native mother tongue, which is called Čarkavian, and it is different from Štokavian and from the Slovenian language. Modern linguistics considered the Croatian language to be ancient Štokavian. And all of these languages are Serbian, in fact. Mr. Marcusen may laugh at this to his heart's content, but it seems that he doesn't know anything about these things. Why did he become involved in this trial at all? You cannot conduct this trial as some trials conducted against Serb officials for the crimes in Kosovo. He managed to to put a bone on contention among the accused, and this is something that he cannot do here, because he is faced here with somebody who is far superior to him. And I really cannot resist the arrogance that I'm displaying that emanates from this superiority. Now, almost destroyed as a nation and scattered around Europe, Croats had their nobility living in Slavonia and western parts of Croatia, and they forced their Caucasian neighbors to declare themselves as Croats. Ljudevit Gaj, who was the leader of a movement, started a paper called Danica, which was first published in Caucasian and then in Štokavian accent. The Bishop of Đakovo, Julian, says that the Serbs and the Croats were one and the same nation, only they were divided by religion into Catholics and Orthodox. However, this could not be proven in Dalmatia, let alone in Slavonia. Admittedly, there was no awareness of being Serbs developed among the people living in Slavonia. However, they were aware of their Slavonian identity. They had a leader called Mato Topalović, and he published a number of articles in which he resisted attempts to have Slavonians declared as Croats. And this struggle lasted until 1850, and the second phase was in 1900. Then, at the initiative of some Croatian intellectuals, amongst whom was Mažuranić, for example, a so-called Vienna Convention was reached, representing the Serbs were Vuk Karadžić and Đura Daničić, and based on that agreement, the Serbs and the Croats started speaking the same standard language and started calling it Serbo-Croatian or Croatian-Serbian. And before the ink got dry on that agreement, the Croatians started systematically corrupting this language in order to distinguish it from the Serbs. At the first Catholic Congress in Zagreb, it was proclaimed that all Shtokavian-speaking people are Croats of Catholic faith, and this is the root of the tremendous evil that was to reach its climax in the crimes during the Second World War, because some of the Croatian clerics committed or were complicit to the most terrible crimes, and other people who committed the worst crimes were Catholic Serbs, because by annihilating the Orthodox Serbs, they tried to annihilate everything that reminded them of their Serbian origins. So, without taking into account all these historical facts, it is impossible to judge the current situation. The past of all former generations is a burden, like a nightmare, on the minds of people living nowadays. We cannot behave as if history starts from us. We have to remember everything that our forebears went through, and we relive it again. That is the reason why, as soon as the Ustaša traditions were revived in Croatia, we sent alarms to the Serbian public.
Since 1981, as early as then, I warned of the pan-Islamist tendencies in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 1986, my book, The Witch Hunt Against the Heretic, was banned. But I proceeded with substantiated arguments. And it's not the Izetbegović's group that was the problem, but the regime in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which back in the communist times revived and started pan-Islamist ideas, attempting to frame Bosnia and Herzegovina as a majority Islamist state. I have once before been held accountable for what you are trying me. Why are you trying me again for the same thing? My demand to deconstruct the Yugoslav Federation, my demand to abolish the Muslim nation, etc. I was tried for that in Sarajevo in 1984, and you are trying me for the second time for the same thing. You can convict me 100 times, but you cannot kill the truth. The truth is more powerful than all of us together. Unlike you, I am convinced in the truth of what I'm saying, and that's why I'm more relaxed. Whereas you are wallowing in problems. You are in a vice between the task set to you and the pressures put on you by those dark Western powers, and you have to cope with the task. The prosecution says that the establishment of Serbian autonomous regions in the territory of the Croatian and Bosnian Herzegovinian federal units was a step in creating a greater Serbian state. That is not true either. By creating Serbian autonomous regions, the Serbs were primarily trying to prevent the secession of Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina and to force Croats and Muslims to negotiate on the theory that if you stay within Yugoslavia, we will stay in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. If you want to go away, we don't want to go away with you. That was the Serbian policy. In the Serbian autonomous region of Krajina, which included Dalmatia, Lika, Banija and Kordun, and in Western Slavonia and the Serbian autonomous region Eastern Slavonia, Baranja and Western Srem. That was the basic policy in all Serbian autonomous regions formed in the area of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Why not establish them? Serbs, when they established those autonomous regions, they did not expel anyone. They did not persecute anyone. They never spoke about a greater Serbian state. They kept emphasizing one thing alone. We want to stay in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was created in 1918, and we want it to survive. That's all. Nothing more. Who was the disruptive factor in the Balkans? Those who broke Yugoslavia up. Not those who wanted to preserve it. I was one of the few Serb intellectuals who understood how great the Serbian mistake was in the creation of Yugoslavia. If we had not accepted Yugoslavia in 1918, nowadays Serbia would include all of Slavonia, all of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the Adriatic coast until the peninsula of Planak, north of Split. It would not be called Greater Serbia, it would be called simply Serbia. Our political leaders and the regent, Aleksandar Karađorđević, wanted more. They wanted a union of southern Slavs and thus destroyed Serbian interests. They didn't know whom they were uniting with. Serbian Orthodox people, Serbian Catholic people, and Serbian Muslims should have united. We should have left Croats and Slovenes alone and let them agree with Austrians, with Italians, with Hungarians, who takes what territory. And we should have left them to their own devices. Unfortunately, this was not done. The prosecution holds it against me that I enumerate all Serbian lands. That features in the first program of the Serbian Chetnik movement and the Serbian Radical Party, later on in our program declaration, and that remains our orientation today. Indisputably, the Serbian land remains the same today, including Vojvodina and Kosovo and Metohija. You want to seize Kosovo from us, but you won't manage, even if rivers of blood have to flow again. If we, the current generation, do not succeed, our sons and our great-grandsons will succeed. Macedonia was officially recognized as part of the Serbian territory after the First Balkan War. According to the Bucharest Agreement, this is indisputable. After the Second World War, according to the Versailles Agreement, nobody ever questioned that Macedonia belongs to Serbia. Serbs themselves contributed to a certain ethnic assertion of Macedonia. If they are not exactly the same as Serbs, they are very similar. Nobody is as similar to Serbs as Macedonians. Serbs gave Macedonians a federal unit, but when Macedonians wanted to secede, Serbs never tried to stop it by force. Yes, I raised a bit of a racket against that, but we never did anything to stop it. We thought they would get some independence, they will live out these whims of theirs, and then they'll come back. However, the Americans intervened, took over the military base in Vojna Palanka, the Krivolak base. They gave Albanians an opportunity to mutiny, to mount an insurgency, and then occurred an explosion in Albanian-Macedonian relations. Tensions are rising, and Macedonia will be in trouble. Don't forget, Macedonia is only the land nowadays that the Serbian army liberated in the First World War. Only those living in those territories have the right to call themselves Macedonia. What the Bulgarians conquered is now part of Greater Bulgaria. What the Greeks conquered has long been Greek. Nobody ever mentions the existence of Macedonians there anymore. And the prosecution blames me in their closing argument that back in 1990, on Ilindan, a great Serbian holiday celebrated by Macedonians as well, I went to the Prohoropčinski monastery, and from the walls of a Serbian Orthodox monastery, I crushed atheist, Satanist plaques depicting the hammer and sickle, saying that at some point in history the communists held a meeting there and agreed about an insurgency and the building of a communist Macedonia. What was that plaque doing on a Serbian Orthodox monastery? What were those atheist, Satanist emblems doing there? And proceedings again were started against me. That was on Ilindan, 1990, sometime at 5 o'clock. I broke those plaques, and now proceedings are underway. Witnesses are being heard. They can hold me accountable for a misdemeanor only if I had disturbed order and peace. But the monks of the monastery said we were not disturbed. We heard the sounds of the hammer, and that was pleasing to our ears. The people had gathered there already from Serbia and Macedonia by 5 o'clock, since it's a great holiday. And they said we were not disturbed in the least. We really liked it when Vojislav Šešelj appeared and took those plaques off. So they had to free me. They had to acquit me. And now the prosecution is portraying this as a sign that I am a bad person or what? Macedonia does not feature in my indictment. Montenegro has always been Serbian, even when they had their own statehood and independence. It declared itself as Serbian in its own constitution. In the territory of the current Montenegro and northern Albania, the first Serbian state was created back in the times of King Časlav, King Stefan Vojislav, King Bodin, King Jovan Vladimir. That was all the way up to the end of the 10th century. So what? Do I deny that a Montenegrin nation exists? Of course I do. Every honorable person does, because a Montenegrin nation is a trick. It's deceit. Only dishonest people can say that Montenegrins exist as a nation. As for Bosnia, in the Middle Ages it was constantly almost part of Serbia. What was not part of Serbia is a small area in central Bosnia, perhaps Sarajevo, Kiseljak, Vojnica, no farther than Zavidović. North of that, Usora and Soli, that's the land of King Dragutin. Serbian monasteries attest to that. The Herzegovina is the land of forefathers of Saint Sava. The first Herceg, Saint Stefan, got his title from Saint Sava and proclaimed himself Herceg, which means Duke. That's the German for Duke, so he's a colleague of mine of sorts. And that was in the monastery of Mileševo, today's Serbia. Dubrovnik was first a Roman city, and the entire environs was Serbian. And through constant resettlement, its ethnic structure was changed. The Roman population remained patricians, but the majority of citizens were Serbs, and Dubrovnik used to be a Catholic city. But Serb Catholics lived there. All prominent Dubrovnik intellectuals are Catholic Serbs, including Ivan Gundulić, including Ruđer Bošković. Ruđer Bošković comes from my family. His father, Nikola, resettled from the same village as my father, Orahov Do. He resettled to Dubrovnik 200 years earlier. That's the only difference. And there he married an Italian woman. From a marriage between a Serb and an Italian woman, Ruđer Bošković was born. And now Croatian are claiming it as its own. Dalmatia, at the time Croats and Serbs arrived, was only the territory between Zadar and Split. Omiš was Serbian, and the border between Croatia and Serbia was on the Cetina River. Croatia was far back in the hinterland of Dalmatian towns, and in all those Dalmatian towns, Roman population lived, and it stayed there for a long time, all the way up until the end of the Second World War, and then the communists expelled 300,000 Italians from there. Lika. Yes, it was originally Croatian. Maybe belonged to Avarians, because Lika of Gatsko had autonomy, and it was headed by Ban. And the Ban of Lika, Krbava, and Gatska was man number 2 in the state. Kordun used indeed to be Croatian, and so was Petrova Gora, which used to be Mount Gvozd. Banija was also Croatian once upon a time, but Croatians disappeared from there. The Ottomans killed some of them, captured others, expelled the third part, and Serbs occupied an empty land at the invitation of the Austrian emperor. So whose land is it now? Slavonia was not Serbian, but it was not Croatian either. It used to be Slovenian. Slavonia and Slovenia is the same thing. It was an integral part of a state called Greater Morava state, which included Slovakia, the Czech state, and the Pannonian Plain. And when the Croatians came to the Pannonian Plain, they pushed the Slovenes further south. The toponyms, the place names, say it all. Slovenia, Slavonia, Slovakia, they all have the same root. Now, Caucasian Slavonians were pushed back from Slavonia up to the line held by the Turks. And that's part of what is today Western Slavonia. And the Turks settled primarily Muslim population there, but also a lot of Orthodox Serbs, to be serfs or to be border guards. So what am I claiming as our own now? I'm not claiming anything. It's Serbian land, and I have proof that it's Serbian land. Am I not allowed to say that it's Serbian land? Should I be hesitant or shy about saying it in public? Why? Because I'm in danger of being convicted by you? I couldn't care less whether you will convict me. I told you as much on day one. I'm not interested in your judgment at all. I've used this trial as a public political platform to settle my accounts with the Hague Tribunal and the dark forces whose instrument this tribunal is. And I've done this with huge success. I can't imagine anyone being more successful in this endeavor than I, and I'm sure you can't either. You have been witnesses to this. The prosecution says that at the beginning of the war, Serbs tried to take strategically important points. What's strange about that? In every war, opposing sides try first of all to take strategically important points. For us Serbs, strategically important points were scattered across the Serbian Krajina, and especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina. A strategically important point for us is the corridor between Serbian Krajina and Semberia. We had to cut this corridor through, or we would have condemned Krajina to disaster, to failure. And we have made this corridor. Volunteers of the Serbian Radical Party participated in it, and I'm proud of that. And in this entire operation of making the corridor, you were unable to find anything incriminating.
Mi smo Srbi bili uspješni.
We Serbs were successful. We made the corridor. And now the Western forces want to steal that corridor from us by supervising Brčko, by manipulating the so-called arbitration process regarding Brčko, and by the false interpretation of the Dayton Accords, which left the Arbitration Commission to determine the entity line between the two entities, and the Arbitration Commission consisted of a representative of the Western forces, one Serb and one Muslim. They voted the Serb over, and instead of determining a border, they decided that Brčko would be a district. When needed, they would try and break the Republika Srpska in two parts in Brčko. You are surprised that the Drina River held quite a big significance for the Serbs. Of course it did. The Drina River flows through the center of the Serbian lands, and it is very important, therefore. We had to prevent the possible destruction of the electrical power plants on the river, as well as the planned destruction of the Red Mud Dam near Zvornik, and Muslims had been preparing for that. The strategic goal of exceeding the Adriatic coast. That is and has always been one of the strategic goals of Serbia. First of all, the Great Britain in 1915 guaranteed that Serbia would have access to the Croatian coast. In 1916, the so-called London Pact envisaged that. And then in 1918, American President Wilson submitted a declaration to the American Congress. The declaration had 14 bullet points. Under bullet point 11 of the declaration, it says, the occupied territories of Serbia and Montenegro had to be reinstated, i.e. what Austro-Hungarians and the Germans had occupied, and Serbia had to be provided with a free access to the sea. American President Wilson guaranteed that in 1918. And now we have been deprived from that free and safe access to the sea. We will never give up on the free and unhindered access to the sea. We will have to get it once again. How? I don't know how. I don't know it in advance, but we will never give up on that goal. Once an opportunity presents itself, when the current Western powers are crushed. Let's just look at the crisis surrounding euro and the budgetary deficits of some members of the European state. Either the European Union is going to invest hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars into saving Greece, or everything will fall through. And this is a vicious circle. And I hope that very soon the European Union will go under. Certainly it will go under before they force Serbia to become a member. America also has to go under. America survives only on the printing of the dollar. The only industry that America has, and that is of some relevance, is the printing of the dollar. When the rest of the world stops accepting American dollars as an equivalent of the value of all commodities, America will go under. There is nothing to preserve it. The entire empire is founded on the prevalence of the American dollar. We will never give up on having access to the Adriatic Sea, and you can sentence me to 100 years in prison for saying that. You're also holding it against me that I supported the Serbian Democratic Party. That's correct at first. That was in the year 1990 when the Serbian Democratic Party was established in the former Croatian federal unit while it was still an integral unit. And when the Serbian Democratic Party was established in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we, at first members of the Serbian Chetnik movement, and then from 1991 members of the Serbian Radical Party, considered that we didn't have to establish our own party over there, but that all the Serbs had to be united around the Serbian Democratic Party. That was our position in 1990 and at the beginning of 1991. However, the Serbian Democratic Party broke up in the territory of the former Croatian territorial unit, and its Krajina segment separated from the rest of the party. And since we were not satisfied with some of the aspects of the policies of the Serbian Democratic Party in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we decided to establish our own party over there. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, at first, only 3 branches were set up. One in Banja Luka, headed by lawyer Nikodin Čavić, the other in Bijeljina, headed by Mirko Blagojević, and the third one in Sarajevo, headed by Branislav Gavrilović. In 1992, we had only those 3 branches, nowhere else in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Sometime in May 1992, I was visited by Nikola Poplashin. He was a professor at the same Faculty of Political Sciences where I used to teach. We knew each other from Sarajevo. He was a prominent intellectual. At the time, he was a bit more red, but he was healed from the communist disease. I take the most blame for that, and I saw him as the best person to spearhead the foundation of the Serbian Radical Party. We also approached Rade Leskovac, and we entrusted him with establishing the Serbian Radical Party of the Republic of Serbian Krajina. We had a branch in Knin already, headed by Tode Lazic. And in 1991, we also had a nucleus of the Serbian Chetnik Party more than the Serbian Radical Party in Eastern Slavonia. And that's it. That was all. And then we started establishing serious political parties. They were linked to the Serbian Radical Party in Serbia, or rather in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, but they had an autonomy of sorts, and they were registered in the Republika Srpska and in the Republic of Serbian Krajina as independent parties. In other words, that period of support extended by the Serbian Radical Party was very short. We extended support to the Serbian Radical Party of Republika Srpska in 1996 because we did not want to put forth our candidates for the President of the Republic and a member of the President of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We only had our list for parliamentary elections, and we won 10% of the voters. Unfortunately, we supported Biljana Plavšić as the future President of the Republic, and very soon it turned out to be a huge mistake, both by Karadzic and his associates and ours, because we supported her, although we knew who Biljana Plavšić was. The problem for the prosecutor is the fact that Serbia assisted and helped Western Serbs, and the prosecutor says how Serbia helped them. Serbia would have been a land of traitors if it hadn't helped its Western brethren. Imagine, America helped the so-called Contras in Nicaragua. Those Contras that fought the sanguinistic regime and committed atrocious crimes. Nicaragua started a case against America, but the American Court of Justice did not take that into account. They said America did help them, but not to rise into power, but to help them. And now when the defense presented that argument in the Tadic case and invoked the judgment of the International Court of Justice, the trial chamber here concluded that precedent could not be used because Serbia has to be taken accountable for helping its brethren in the West. America helped bandits, criminals, the traitors of the Nicaraguan people, and we, in our turn, helped our brethren. America was not held responsible for helping bandits, and we are being held responsible for helping our brethren who had already experienced the bloody Ustasha knife in the Second World War, and now we had to let them experience that same thing again. The killing of the Serbs had already started in towns. They were fired from work and so on and so forth. In a party of wedding guests in front of an old Serbian church, older than all the mosques in Sarajevo, Nikola Gardovic, the bridegroom's father, was killed. The police did not react, and the assassin soon became one of the main Muslim commanders in Sarajevo. He was killed only after the war as in a showdown of Sarajevo criminals, because he himself was a well-known criminal. The prosecutor also evokes the role of the JNA. At first, the JNA tried to preserve the entire state of Yugoslavia, and then it reduced its goal to the protection of the Serbs. And this was openly written by General Veljko Kadijević in his book. What else could the JNA have done? We condemn the leadership of the JNA for actually interfering in some conflicts in Slovenia, and they had sent bare-handed lads against armed Slovenian territorials, hunting societies, criminals, and so on and so forth. And when I say that those lads were bare-handed, what does that mean? They had arms, but they did not have live bullets, and they were like clay pigeons for Slovenian rebels. And it never occurred to you to try anybody from Slovenia for that crime. And what about the resolution of the Security Council? The mandate that it gave to the Hague Tribunal also encompassed the territory of Slovenia. Why was that not taken into account? How come nobody from Slovenia was taken responsible for that massacre that took place? Of course you didn't do that, because your main objective are Serbs, not anybody else or everybody else. And now look at another thing here. When the state borders are threatened, every military in the world would distribute arms to the loyal population living around the borders. Every military in the world would do that, to defend themselves, to make it easier for them to organize themselves. Why is it then the problem that the JNA supplied arms to the Serbian population? I've already explained to you how that was done illegally at first, how we broke into military depots and took weapons from there. Later on, the JNA provided us with more modern weapons. It was only later that the Serbs were provided with the modern Kalashnikovs, and that was after the month of August 1991. Up to then, we had provided them with written-off, obsolete Thompson rifles, M48 rifles, Pagin rifles, and similar weaponry. All of that had been planned for destruction, and there were even documents to that effect showing that those weapons had already been destroyed as obsolete. If the task of the JNA was to preserve the territorial integrity of Yugoslavia, and then it turned out to be impossible, then they had to save what they could save. That was the reduction of the JNA goals that I've mentioned. We couldn't keep Slovenia and Yugoslavia. Okay, let it go. Let's keep what we can. The JNA was very late in abandoning some territories that were never Serbian territories. For example, Varaždin. General Trifunović was there. He surrendered the entire Varaždin court to the Croats, 120 most modern tanks and other armored tools. Instead of blowing all that up, or instead of trying to break through with that, because that was huge firepower, he could have given them an ultimatum. He could have said, either you will let me through or I will destroy Varaždin. He surrendered everything instead. And instead of executing him in the middle of Belgrade, he was sentenced to a mild sentence, and now the pro-Western traitor regime has amnestied him completely. This is what happened to us, amongst other things. The JNA was late, the JNA was not up to the speed. You are commending the Guards Brigade in your closing argument, and you say that it was an elite brigade with the best educated soldiers, best trained soldiers. This is ridiculous. They were not trained to do anything but to be on sentry detail in cities and to participate in ceremonious units in case a foreign statesman decided to visit. If there were no volunteers, if there were no territorial soldiers, the motorized brigade would still be lodged in the mud around Vukovar. The mere fact that they didn't have trained soldiers, they used heavy weaponry, even if that was not justified. Unfortunately, that's the kind of an army that the JNA was. The JNA had to carry out a triage, to put the most capable officers to the fore. Those who were not capable withdrew of their own will. They would leave, and when the JNA became the Army of Yugoslavia, it recovered. And already in 1992, during the NATO aggression, we had a really serious army, so serious that NATO would have never dared use infantry to intervene in Serbia. Unfortunately, the state leadership of Serbia accepted the semi-capitulation. NATO entered Kosovo and Metohija. The Serbian Radical Party was the only one who consistently opposed that, and we were the only one in the assembly who voted against that, because we were ready to fight the NATO infantry to show them what kind of soldiers Serbs are. They would have never dared attack us by land. The prosecutor says that I was a fanatic who contributed to an unlawful enterprise, that I instigated a hatred campaign and persecution campaign. This is nonsense. I was not a fanatic. My propaganda was real. It was based on facts. The prosecutor, quoting the alleged expert Oberschel, has tried to prove that a propaganda campaign is tantamount to spreading a lie. In the West, maybe every propaganda is a lie, not in Serbia. The most successful propaganda in Serbia is propaganda based on the truth. And that's the kind of propaganda campaign that the Serbian Radical Party has pursued from its foundation. We have always told the Serbian people the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And that is the secret of our success and our vitality. That is also the secret of the huge trust that the Serbian people has in us. Even those who do not vote for us respect our principles, our honesty and loyalty and perseverance and loyalty to the goals that we fight for. There were no places where any persecution campaign took place, because there was no persecution. A persecution that would be the result of that campaign.
There was no persecution in Serbia. We saw that in Hrtkovci. Not a single inhabitant of Hrtkovci was deported from Serbia. None of them were forcibly relocated. You know what forcible relocation is? This is what the Americans did with the Japanese and interned them in concentration camps pending the end of the war. That's a forcible transfer. Do you know what deportation is? Look at the example of the Germans deported from Poland, Czechoslovakia. That is deportation. It means that you either have enough time to take some of your belongings, and sometimes you don't even have enough time to do that. people who were going to Croatia 3 or 4 times to measure up the properties that they were to swap, that cannot be called deportation. Tudjman was also in favor of the exchange of population, so was Dobrica Ćosić. They spoke about a civilized exchange of population, and I adhered to the same principle. Even when I spoke about our programs, I never said you are going to be expelled. No, instead I said you are going to be given addresses of the Serbian property and you are going to swap your properties with them. That cannot be described as the crime of persecution. It might be unpleasant as a fact, but this is not the crime of persecution. It does not involve deportation.
Došlo je do promjene etničke strukture.
The ethnic composition in the territories was altered, and that is true. But how did it all start? It started when Serbs started fleeing Croatia. As soon as Franjo Tudjman won the 1990 elections, and that was an ongoing process, and it still goes on to this date. There's no return for the Serbs to their land, with the exception of some elderly people who prefer to go back to their ancestral homes and die there and be buried there. Nobody else is returning. There are no guarantees for their return. There is no restitution of the Serbian property. And you never tried anyone for what the Serbs experienced in Croatia. You are trying to deal with the consequences of inhumane acts rather than with the causes.
Etnička struktura teritorija.
The ethnic composition changed in Bosnia and Herzegovina as well. But how did that happen? The first exodus was that of the Serbian people, mostly from Sarajevo, and then from other towns such as Tuzla, Zenica, Zavidovići, Maglaj, Mostar. And then you had a mass of Serbian refugees flooding parts of the Republika Srpska where the Muslims were still residing. And of course the very appearance of these refugees is a form of pressure. But this is not a planned pressure or designed pressure. It is a natural pressure. And very often populations were exchanged spontaneously because people felt more secure among their own. If you have tens of thousands of Serbs arriving in Zvornik from Tuzla and other places, what can you do? Who can prevent that? And you never tried a single Muslim for the persecution of Serbs. Yes, you did try Hazem Delic and Esad Lanja for the crimes committed in Čelebići. You picked up people from the lowest rungs of the social ladder in order to present it as a kind of balance. You also tried General Seferovic, and he was acquitted. You tried Hadžić Hasanović and Kubura as well, and they were sentenced to token sentences. First, Mr. Antonetti gave them 3 years each. if I'm not mistaken, and then the appeals chamber reduced that sentence to 1.5 years. Nasser Oric was sentenced to 2 years, and after that he was acquitted. Rasim Delic was sentenced to 3 years. Mrs. Latanzi was on the bench, and we anticipated that the appeals chamber was going to acquit him altogether.
To vam je rezultat vaših procesa.
And these are the results of your trials against Muslims. On the other hand, the Serbs are handed in life sentences, etc.
Već 90. godine formirali zelene beretke.
It is not Muslims' fault that they had to form their armed formations. They had established their patriotic league. They brought mujahideen from other Islamic countries and eventually committed atrocious crimes in their territories. Who was tried for the crimes committed in Kazan, in Pofalici and other places where Serbs were butchered? You didn't try anyone. The front line ran through the middle of Sarajevo. The Serbs and the Muslims were shooting on each other by using artillery and whatever weapons they had. However, you say that only the Serbs are to blame, whereas, according to you, the Muslims were simply defending themselves from the barbarians. With all this false judgment rendered by the ICTY, you are attempting to falsify history. Do you really believe that history is going to be written based on your judgment? No. Your judgments are going to be the subject of historical research, and then these judgment will be conducive to the compromising of international justice. It will compromise it even further because it's already been compromised. I already said that the prosecution was citing my speeches beyond the time span of the indictment prior to 1st August 1991 and after 1993. They even quote a book of mine which was published in the year 2000. It seems that the prosecution is in the dark. They would like to have me convicted, but they still don't know how to achieve that. They assembled scraps and pieces of evidence. They engaged some lawyers who were full of self-confidence at the beginning, but who are actually not capable of coping with this kind of proceedings. And everything turns out to be falsehood.
So, I'm not going to make any big speeches, just to tell you that it's time for a break. We shall resume at 5:45, and according to the time left, you still have 1 hour and 10 minutes. So at 5 to 7, in theory, you should be finished with your closing arguments. So that's the situation as it is now. We're going to break for 30 minutes.
Danas da završim ako bude moguće.
I'll do my best to finish today, if it is possible.